goes by. If this is your first 60 plus event, welcome, a special welcome to you. I hope we'll see you again. We have a great program today, and I'm going to turn it over to Andrea Casson, who is a board member of the network, to get us started. Andrea?
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it. And it's so good to see all the beautiful faces of our 60 plus group. We like to take pictures of our gallery. So if you wouldn't mind turning on your video for a minute or two, no judging here at what anybody looks like. We love to see our members, and we only get to see you about once a month. So this is a thrill for us, but feel free to, we'll take a few pictures, and then you can feel free to shut off the video and you can go play with the cat or whatever you're going to do. Books is obviously a topic very near and dear to the heart of so many, if not everyone at Emory. We've got our fabulous libraries that I'm sure we all spent time in as students, and since then, looking at the beautiful collections. Emory has a long-standing relationship with the Decatur Book Festival. There's numerous book clubs that are part of Emory. And so this is the kind of event that our members, you have been asking for quite some time. And we've been trying to put it together for some time. And we're all very excited to be able to finally bring you a book event. And we do hope to bring more book events in the future. So, feel free to continue giving your feedback to Kevin Kell about the type of events that interest you. But this is our event, the Tips to Write, Publish, Insights from 3 Emory authors. And we appreciate you spending the next hour with us to hear about the process these authors went through to get their books published. As usual, if you have questions that are appropriate for the whole group, please put them in the chat, and I will work them in as best I can. All right, so why don't we get started? I'm going to give you a very brief bio of our 3 authors, and they should be on your top row. And we're going to start with Kevin, who's in the middle, Kevin Poplowski. He is an Emory physical therapist, and his wife works at CHOA, so lots of Emory connections there, his wife Elizabeth. He has 2 little girls, and he has written 2 children's books. One is about an elephant trying to make a basketball team, which I really want to read that, and a book explaining COVID to children. And there's a lot of healthcare and COVID theme in these books, and you can see how they would have evolved in the time we're in. If you're looking to Kevin's left is Shelley Hutchinson. Shelley is a nursing alum from the 70s, and we don't give specific years, we'll just say decades. Board certified child and adolescent advanced practice psychology nurse, and had a long career as a therapist. She's written 2 books, The Physical and Psychosocial Care of Children with Stomas, and COVID Quarantine Crisis, a story to help children through the pandemic. So we've given, and when we send out the email with the video link, we will include links to the titles of everyone's books and how to purchase them if you're interested, because we've now got 2 good sources to help children through the pandemic, which unfortunately we're still in. But Shelley is retired now, and as she says, she's willing to go to any party, so invite her and her husband Chuck if you're doing something fun. And on the far right, we have Roseanne Barnett. She writes as Arlene Barnett. You may have seen that. She is an undergraduate and graduate from Emory, also in the 70s, as so many of our group is. And she transitioned from being a big appler to a Georgia peach and has settled in. She's been writing her whole life almost. She wrote for the Emory Wheel, which I thought was very interesting. And she's currently writing and shares her house with her husband, Larry. Her books are called What Patients Want, Anecdotes and Advice. And you gotta love this title. My Mother Has Alzheimer's, My Dog Has Tapeworms, A Caregiver's Tale. And, caregiving is something we find ourselves doing at this point in our lives. And actually, we're going to try to do an event on caregiving because we think it's a really important topic. But I think you'll see that these topics are so relevant to every day. So I'm going to stop talking and start asking questions so you can hear from these wonderful authors and stop hearing from me. So Shelley, we're going to start with you. If you would tell us, beyond graduating from Emory, what is your affiliation with Emory? Oh, you know what? You're muted, Shelley. And Roseanne, so are you. So you might want to take this moment.
Okay, all right. I graduated, as you know, from the nursing school, and then I worked pediatric consultation liaison at Grady and received an appointment at Emory Medical School as clinical faculty for over 10 years. And I also lectured at the nursing school occasionally. And I just consider Emory to be a part of my blood.
Thank you, Shelley. And Roseanne, why don't we go to you next? Tell us your affiliation with Emory.
Okay, well, as you mentioned, I wrote for the Emory Wheel, which contributed to the fact that writing is in my wheelhouse. I was lucky enough as an undergrad to get a writing internship with Emory's alumni magazine. And if I can share one of my assignments, I think it's interesting. One of my assignments was to review Dr. Neil Schulman's book, Finally I'm a Doctor. He was a professor at the med school. He went on to write the book upon which the movie Doc Hollywood with Michael J. Fox was based. Dr. Schulman's very kind endorsement of the Alzheimer's book, which I will show for 2 seconds, graces the front cover. So not only did that internship hone my writing skills, but it allowed me to meet people whom I wouldn't normally have met. And like Shelley, I consider Emory to be in my blood. You know, I sort of grew up as from a teenager to a young woman to now an older woman. And I loved going to Emory, and I'll always consider Emory to be part of me.
Great, thank you, Roseanne. And Kevin?
Yeah, so I'm relatively newer to the Emory community. My wife and I moved here from Chapel Hill, North Carolina in 2011, and I am a physical therapist that works at the Emory Sports Medicine Complex, and I recognize a bunch of familiar faces out there as well. And yeah. And so I work at Emory. We were only supposed to be here for 2 years for my wife's training as a physician at Children's Healthcare, but that was 11 years ago. So we decided that Emory was a great place for us and Atlanta was a great place for us. So here we are 11 years later. And Andrea mentioned, I've written actually 3 children's picture books. Eli's Magic Moment is the elephant story. And then we end up writing a sequel with the same illustrator. The Trekker's New Hope is a sequel to that. And then my children's book on COVID, Together, Living Life During COVID-19. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. And, everybody feel, not everybody, a lot of people feel they have a book inside of them and, we don't make it to the book. What was your incentive or what triggered you to finally say, yep, I got to get this book out of me and I'm going to get it written? Shelley, you want to?
Sure. So of my 2 books, the first one was the physical and psychosocial care of children with stomas. And that was triggered by being in consultation liaison psychiatry and working on a consultation unit, a consultation group that worked with pediatrics, both surgical trauma and chronic illness. And being appointed to the Emory faculty, I felt compelled to publish. So that was the first one. And then the second one, I was aware that my children and grandchildren were in lockdown, and that's COVID quarantine crisis. And I decided to write something in rhyme that would be fun to read. I had Dr. Seuss in mind. And so I wrote this rhyming book about the COVID germs and kids being locked down and missing their friends and how they could do things themselves to make a difference so that the pandemic is more acceptable, as it were, and adjust to the circumstances.
Great, thank you. Kevin, you want to go next?
Sure. So when my daughters are 8 and 6, and when my first daughter was born, I ended up, as any dad would do, we would tell stories at night. And one of the stories about this elephant that played basketball kind of stuck. And we kind of expanded on it over and over again. And at one point I said to my wife, and I've never written anything, I don't consider myself a writer until this happened. And when we started to formulate more of a story, I said, this could be a book. And so we'll talk more about the process of that going forward, but we ended up producing a nice children's picture book, and we got some nice demand for it that we ended up producing a sequel to that book. And then once the pandemic hit, the Emory Global Health Institute ran a contest to explain the pandemic to kids back in April of 2020. And I think it was a growing need to do so. And so there was a small window of time to do this contest. And so I contacted my illustrator from the first two books, and we ended up producing the COVID book, and it won an award from the Emory Global Health Institute. So we were pretty proud of that. And hopefully that helped kids to understand what's going on April of 2020 up until today. And so that's kind of the story of the three books that I published and the reason behind them.
Wonderful. I'm sure we have plenty of parents and grandparents out there with bedtime stories that would also make a book. So that's a great benefit. Thank you, Kevin. And Roseanne.
Yeah, I'll add to this too. I wrote What Patients Want because I figured I had been adrift in a draft, if you get my drift, in several doctor's offices over the years. So I felt I could share the perspective of the patient in the white paper sack with the people in white lab coats. And I wrote the Alzheimer's book. My mother has Alzheimer's and my daughter has tapeworms, when my husband and I took care of my mom for 5 years when she had Alzheimer's. Since both books deal with healthcare, I think they're complementary. In fact, I know they're complementary because the patient book said, "You're a good book." And the Alzheimer's book said, "Thank you, you are too." But in all, and I'm glad you left. In all seriousness, they're complementary because the patient book deals with healthcare from the patient's perspective, and the Alzheimer's book deals with it from the caregiver's point of view.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you. Okay, and I think the three of you have each hit in this, but if there's something additional you want to share, did your Emory experience contribute to the book, either in the content or the process? And Shelley, I think you've already told us that your work made you felt compelled to publish, but anything else the three of you want to share of Emory's role in your writing?
Yeah, I can touch base on that. Like I said, my wife is a physician at Children's Healthcare, and she's what's called a physiatrist, which is a rehab physician. And she takes care of kids who, have some disability, and some people might not think that they have the ability to do certain things. And it was one of the inspirations behind the character of Eli. And not to be a spoiler for the end of the story, but Eli produces a talent that nobody thought he could have. And a lot of children out there may not think that they have this special talent that can help the team. And so to develop the concepts of teamwork and mentorship and believability, believing in yourself and believing in someone else, I thought that was a really important concept because my wife deals with that every day in the patients that she works with. And I deal with that with some of the patients I work with. I try to bring the best out in some of them. And so that character of kind of producing that, and then, in the sequel, Eli is the mentor to those people. It just brings a nice message about. And so that's kind of where the inspiration behind those books came from, mine and my wife's experience through Emory and Children's Healthcare.
That's fantastic. And I like that you made the connection to your work, because it's not just children who have trouble finding their place.
Sure.
As we get older and our children leave, and maybe we've retired, or maybe we're just in cruise control in our career, it's, we're looking at where do we fit in and where can we add value. And so I think that is a great message for us as well. And that is a lot of what we do at 60 plus, is trying to enrich and provide opportunities for our group.
Sure. Even to add to that, with my COVID book, I based it on my kids' experiences. And at one point, it was April of 2020, and my daughter looked at me, and she hadn't left the house in a month. And she said to me, "Dad, I'm afraid my school blowed down." And I said, "What do you mean?" She's like, "I haven't seen it in a month. I don't know that it's there." And she was 5 or 6 years old at the time. And so we went out, we got in the car, and we drove around, and we saw that our church was still there and our school was still there. And that was actually one part of the book, was like, hey, everything's still going on outside the world there, and everybody's, they're still doing their thing. So we're going to be okay. So that was an inspiration for part of the book as well.
Thank you.
Piggybacking on what you've just said, Kevin, in my book, which I said is in rhyme, the mother and dad are working remotely and the kids feel ignored because even though the door is open or closed, they really can't access their parents. They were more used to the parents coming home and then being able to access them very easily. So I came up with some formulas, again, very playfully, that could unite the kids and the parents and give some understanding to both
Absolutely.
situations.
Makes sense. Yep.
What was the total time frame for your projects? How long did the whole thing take from start to finish to publishing?
Well, my first book, I was under contract with Charles C. Thomas, and it was about 2 years. It was a long time because it was, about a 60-page book and had a lot of information about physical and psychosocial care with a particular patient population. The second book just took a couple of 3 months. It was more of a fun book.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, you don't know how long it's going to take till you start to get into it. And then it probably always takes longer than you want it to, like so many things.
For me, it was
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I was just gonna say, for me, it was about 5 years, and most of that time overlapped with both books, which I wouldn't suggest writing 2 books simultaneously, but it just so happened that my mom, my dog, and I got sick all at the same time. So for me, it was about 5 years, most of that time overlapped.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
And mine took about, it was for the first 2, each of them took about a year. I used the same illustrator for both books. I was connected to my illustrator by a college professor of mine back in Pennsylvania, where I'm from. And so we worked on the first 2 books, and each one took about a year. And then the third one, we had the contest that was announced. It was 2 weeks long. So I contacted my illustrator and I said, hey, Mike, there's this contest, but it's over in 2 weeks to produce a children's book. And he said, that's crazy. Let's do it. And so each day, I was fortunate at work that each day, it was April of 2020 that we really were not busy at work. And so I was able to write the book during the day, and my wife would critique it at night, and I would send it on to him, and he would produce the pictures for it. And I think we finished it in 10 or 11 days. And so different timeframes, different processes. My first book, there were 20 different, I had 20 different Microsoft Word files of 20 different versions of it before I produced the one that actually got published. And so I didn't have that luxury with the third book, but it took different processes for different timeframes. So I definitely learned a lot from both experiences.
Great. And it sounds like you didn't have time for writer's block in that second book, but authors, if you encountered writer's block, how did you get past it?
Well, for me, for the first book, I met with my co-author frequently, and that really helped a lot. And I paced my apartment a lot and making me stay in and do it. And then the second book was just fun. I didn't feel I had writer's block, but I did talk to friends and colleagues in the field, psychiatric field.
I have the reverse of writer's block because I get ideas all the time, including in the shower, which means that sometimes my ideas can be all wet. I also get ideas in the middle of the night. Hence, I have a pad and pen behind my head, behind our bed. So when I get an idea, I can just jot it down. When I'd first get into these contorted positions to reach the pad and pen, my husband would ask, are you hurting? Now he asks, are you inspired? So I try to write both books with humor and heart, and I try to continue that. If I get other ideas, I'm reaching for that pad and pen. So I get the reverse of writer's block.
Thank you.
And I would say with the, with writing, I oftentimes would get an idea in my head and then just try to run it as far as I could. There was rare a time where I said, I'm going to sit down and write. But if I had an idea in my head, I said, oh, I want to run with this right now. But if there was a time that I needed to come up with an idea, and I have written a fourth book, and we're in the process of possibly getting that illustrated and going, what I would do is I would kind of make 3 columns, and I would list in one column different people, or different types of live or main characters, I would say. So you can have a pirate or a jaguar or or something like that. And then the middle column would be like a place, and you could list, the Caribbean or school or your church. And then the last column would be, an accompaniment, whether it was, a pot and pan or a pitcher of water or something like that. And then you try to cross over the 3 columns together and say, what could work together? Oh, that person can work with this place using that object, and then they can complement this person in that place and that object. And so that was a great idea someone had given to me to help to try to formulate a story or try to get back on track to see where the story can take it, because it's your story. You could take it whatever direction you want. And if it makes sense and it's, teaches a lesson and you have fun with it, then go with it.
Great, thank you. That's an interesting process. That would probably work for a lot of things, not just
Sure.
writing a children's book.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So the publishing world has changed a lot in recent times. It used to be there were several big publishers out of New York, and if your book got bought by them, they took care of everything. And if it didn't, you didn't really have a book. That's not even remotely the case anymore. So how did you go about the process of getting your book edited?
So for me, the first book, I was under contract. So I submitted the illustrations and the manuscript to Charles C. Thomas, and they took care of the rest. The second book was a challenge because I used Kindle Direct Publishing, KPD. So it didn't cost me anything up front, which is really different than people who hire illustrators and so on. And I'll talk more about finding an illustrator later. But I really thought it was a deficiency on my part not to have had an editor. And late in the development of the book, I found out that my sister is an advanced practice nurse as I am, but she's in public health and does patient ed brochures. And so I sent the manuscript to her, and she provided grammar and spelling corrections, which was really helpful. But with KPD, the deficit was that if you wanted a page, you had to, like you were saying, Kevin, you had all these different manuscripts. So you had to start over and create another manuscript. And in fact, in my final edition, my last page, which is this family, is lacking the little girl because I put the little girl in later and she made it into the first manuscript, but not the second. So I just tell people that the baby is napping.
There you go.
But it's an error because of the way the algorithm worked.
I edited the books myself. I got an offer from a traditional publisher for the Alzheimer's book. The first one, the patient book, I self-published. The second one, I did get an offer from a traditional publisher, but after looking at the contract, it just wasn't going to be a good fit. So almost by default, I edited that. I wrote it and I edited it myself. And it was suggested to me to read the manuscripts out loud for creating and visual senses. If you just read a book silently, for example, the brain might unintentionally autocorrect your mistakes. So if you wrote a sentence which said, I have a dog, the brain might process it as, I have a dog. Speaking of which, I'd often read my manuscripts aloud to my dog. Sometimes it looked as if she were nodding in approval, but other times she was nodding off and snoring no less. So I hope I don't make you do that, not here and not in the books.
Thank you. All three of you have already talked about publishing a couple of times. Any other tips you'd give us about self-publishing, finding a publisher?
Well, one of the things that I would say, I actually have a close friend who's about to publish a 130-page teen book from covering ages from 9 to 12, and it's a fantasy story. And she hired both an illustrator and she hired an editor. And we're talking about $5,000 per hiring. And for me, the way I found an editor, because I was very naive about it, is I put out a request in Nextdoor, and I also put out a request on my neighborhood website. And it turned out that the daughter of one of my tennis teammates had a website. She was 16. And her mother emailed me and said, would you consider using Jenna as your illustrator? And so I did look at her website, and her illustrations were wonderful. So we met regularly, produced illustrations. And I said, Jenna, anything I get royalty wise, you get half of. And she said, that was fine because this is going to help me get into art school. Wow. Because I'll be a published illustrator. So it was a hand-in-hand agreement. Many ways to skin a cat.
I have a similar experience. My kids, we got a children's book. One of my college professors wrote one, and so we picked it up, and they really enjoyed it. They thought it was really funny, and they really enjoyed the pictures and everything. So I reached out to her and I said, who was your illustrator? Can you tell me about him? And she told me, and we chatted about it, and she connected me with him, and I sent him my manuscript, and it worked out great. He agreed to publish it, and from what I found out is a lot of agents and publishers, they like to find their own illustrator. So to go back to your question, Andrea, about publishing, is I self-published all three of my books, and I did all of them through KDP on Amazon, and that's how I published my books and worked with the illustrator. The agents like to have their usually agents and publishing houses like to have their own illustrators do the work, or the author is also the illustrator, from what I've understood and found out. So I self-published all books. And but I did search out agents to begin with. We have a family friend of my wife's who actually does illustrations for Disney and Disney books. And she connected me with her just for advice, was not looking to employ her. But she said to me, she goes, Kevin, if you go out there and you haven't failed to find an agent unless you have heard back from 50 agents. So you need 50 rejection letters or 50 no replies from agents, and then you can consider another pathway. And so I said, okay, I think my first one, I think I got rejected maybe 30, 35 times or not heard back. And so we decided to go the self-publishing route and everything. But it worked out great because there's advantages and disadvantages. With self-publishing, I can control everything. I can control what markets I want to be in. I can control how I want to release the book. I can, the amount of copies I have, versus if you go through a publishing house, they're kind of in control of it, but they might have broader market appeal. And we'll talk about marketing in a little bit here. So that's kind of the route I went to as I self-published my book. And with editing, I actually followed a site called Writer's Digest, and they had a lot of helpful tips and everything. I attended 2 of their conferences and got a lot of great feedback from conferences. And they had an editing service called Second Draft, and I used that for my books that I sent that to them. They critiqued it, and that was a big help. So I used their service from Writer's Digest.
And what was the cost on that?
I want to say it was for a children's picture book. It wasn't exorbitant. I think maybe $40 or $50.
Oh, that's reasonable.
Yeah, it was definitely reasonable. And I got great feedback, and it really kind of propelled me on the right track for all three. For the first 2 of my books. My wife was my editor for the last book because it was a COVID book and she's a physician. So, yeah.
So we've written the books, you've found the publishers, you feel like you're all done. You're like, woo, I can celebrate. And then you have to promote it and have people buy it. Can you tell us a little bit about that process and maybe what you learned?
Yeah, well, there are several avenues for promoting your book. And I actually have a list of 10 or 11 that I'm going to give you, Andrea, to post rather than go through them. But they're things like creating an author's website, identifying a genre, following other authors in the same genre, reaching out to them, critiquing their books so that your name becomes known. But I'll post that, give it to you to post after the.
We'll put it in the email. Yeah, thank you.
And we had a conversation, our group, a couple of days ago, and I told them, writing the book is the easy part, and it's the marketing and the promoting the book and getting it out there to as many people as possible. I think that's one of the more difficult parts of the process. And for me, with the children's picture books, schools were an important part of my marketing and networking. So my wife's coworker's husband was a principal in a school, and he gave me my first opportunity to come and read to them. And then the media director, the library director at that school, talked to me about someone else, and that got me into another school. And so that kind of snowballed from there. And really, I took as many opportunities as possible. If someone contacted me, and no matter where it was, they were all in the Atlanta area, except for one was back home in Pennsylvania. I went and I read in front of the kids, and I, gave the parents an order form to order the books ahead of time or afterwards. And that's kind of the process of how I got really to get my book out there in front of people and really market it and really kind of get the message out to people.
So
Yeah, I
really
think-
pick and shovel work that you had to do that, I think some of us would think that the publisher would do everything, but I guess since you self-published, you had
Yeah.
to self-promote as well.
Sure.
Even when you get an offer from a traditional publisher, they still want you to do a lot of work. I found that I didn't go with the publisher, as I'd said, but they still want you to do a lot of legwork and make a lot of the contacts. I think for me, it was sort of a combination of social media and what I'm a little more comfortable with, which is sort of old-fashioned word of mouth, like my other colleagues here have said. If I read an article about, let's say, an Alzheimer's researcher or a caregivers group, I would contact them to spread the word about my work. So I think it's a combination of old-fashioned, sharing information and social media.
Well, this is probably a good time for me to ask our audience. We want to identify other Emory authors. We've had some come forward since we announced this event, and it's great to hear from them. So we're going to ask that if you are an Emory author and you'd like to share your book, to reply to one of the messages from Kevin, and we're going to put together a list. Not entirely sure what we're going to do with it yet. Maybe we do another event like this. Maybe we do something else. Maybe we do a book club. We'll see. But we'd like to know all your folks out there. So if you're an Emory author or you know of an Emory author, please send us that information. And I'll also remind you that if you have a question that you'd like asked, please put it in the chat. The agent question was in the chat and Kevin answered it before I asked it, which was fantastic. Okay. You've given us a real education on getting a book published. I'm not even going to say writing a book, because you've all said there's so much more to it than that. What is the one piece of advice you would tell your colleagues here about if they decide after hearing all of this, they want to move forward with pursuing a book?
Well, if you've not published in the past, I would encourage you to take a course. And even currently, Kennesaw offers courses in writing and character development and memoir kits. And OLLI, which is the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, has a course as well.
And since you mentioned OLLI, I'm going to do that plug as well. If there are OLLI chapters all around the nation, I don't know if there's one where you live, because I don't know where you live, but I do know there's one in Atlanta, and the OLLI Atlanta has offered a year's free membership to members of Emory 60 plus. And you're all members of 60 plus just by turning 60 and being an Emory alum. So we've sent out that OLLI information in email, and we've also posted it on our Facebook page. And I know a lot of people don't like Facebook. I'm not a fan either, but it is a great way to get information out. So if you're on Facebook, if you're not yet a member of our Emory 60 page, please do search for it and join. It's also a link to it is in the bottom of our emails. Or just we can republish the OLLI, but I'm glad you mentioned OLLI. Thank you, Shelley. And sorry, Kevin and Roseanne, let's let you answer the question.
No, go ahead.
Kevin, you can go.
Okay. So I would say write what you know and write what you love. Write what you know about and write what you love. And, that's where I felt comfortable. Writing about someone who, really didn't know how he fit in with the team, or, trying to get his way onto the team. But also about basketball. I have a history of playing basketball and everything like that, and mentorship. And I do that a lot. I coordinate students that come to Emory. And so that's part of what I love to do. And don't be afraid to put yourself out there. I remember one of the writing conferences I was at, and a lot of agents attend these writing conferences. And the agents are there because they want clients. And there were pitch sessions where people can pitch their books, and I would listen to people talking about it said, I didn't book a session with an agent. I don't know if I'm ready yet. And I sat back and we would have conversations, say, well, why not? Put yourself out there. You never know, what someone thinks is not acceptable or it's not for them. The next person might think, oh my gosh, this is brilliant. And so don't be afraid to put yourself out there to different people. Or I was, when I first did this and my coworkers, I was just like, hey guys, I wrote a children's book, and I was like, I didn't know what they were going to think of me. And everyone like really was supportive at my work and everything. And so it kind of gave me confidence to do so. So, don't, look at all avenues when you're doing things. Look for help, look for resources, because you never know what that's going to turn into. And so I was glad that I kind of pursued a lot of avenues and still am to this day. So that was a big piece of advice, is just use all your resources, write about what you know and love, and don't be afraid to put yourself out there.
Thank you. We were very careful in crafting this event that it was not going to be a book sale. And we focused on the process. Having said that, we did get a question of how to buy the books that were mentioned. So in our follow-up email, we will send links to where you can purchase the books if you so desire. And I know personally, if I'm buying children's books, I'd rather support an Emory author than an author I don't know. So that we will share that information, but please know we're not pushing books on this. We're talking about the process. And that gets to the next question that was in the chat. You've all mentioned KPD. Can you tell us a little bit more about working with them? I mean, it kind of feels like selling your soul to the devil, but were they expensive? Did they help you? I mean, you've hinted at it, that maybe it wasn't as helpful as you'd hoped it would be, but can you elaborate, please, for us?
I can. Oh, go ahead, Roseanne, please.
I didn't use KDP. I used Lulu, which is a print-on-demand company. The good thing was that you don't have to buy more books than you need. So if I knew I was giving a speech, maybe I would buy 10 or 15 books, but you don't have to have a basement full of books. The drawback in a way is that you're only dealing with them online because it's an online print-on-demand company. But I always had my questions answered and addressed within a few days. To go back to the other question, I want to dovetail on what Kevin said just for a minute. There are companies like BookLogix, which is here in Alpharetta, and Lulu that have free webinars. So, and it covers a variety of topics, copyright issues and cover design, etc. So I don't work for either of those companies. They didn't ask me to say this. So I'm just saying, for prospective writers, you can look at BookLogix, you can look at Lulu. They do have free webinars, and it's a good place to start.
I can touch base on KDP a little bit. I'm going to give you a little bit of a sticker shock and tell you that my book sells for $10, and maybe I think it's because it's full color and it's a children's book. But for every book through Amazon KDP that sells for $10, I made $2.34 on every book. And so that, again, like Roseanne said, I keep no supplies. Everything is print on demand. So if you click on Amazon, the book, it gets sent to you and I get the royalty for it. But that's a big chunk of change that they keep. But again, there's that trade-off of they're producing the book, they're making it look very professional, and there's no inventory that I need to keep. Now I can order books wholesale through them and I make more because I just pay for the cost to print and ship to me. So that was definitely an attractive part of it. So that's kind of my experience with the royalty part. And then I see Susan asked about difficulty in terms of formatting. I was fortunate that my illustrator knew how to upload the files and format everything. And so I learned a little bit from him. I fumbled around with it because I try to do some things myself, but I was very fortunate because it is a little tricky to do, but they do have help to help out. And I'm sure there's a lot of resources out there to help to do that.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk a little bit about KDP too, because
No, I said it wrong, sorry.
no, that's KDP, was that they have a number of videos that are very helpful. And for my first time self-publishing, I learned a boatload, and I put in no investment. I mean, if I wanted to buy author copies to distribute, I could. But the bottom line is that I really I feel like I cut my teeth on KPD. And you were lucky, Kevin, that you had an author or an illustrator who could do the formatting.
Sure.
That was where it became tricky for me.
Yeah.
And, I had to have a whole book sort of put back into the process in order to change one thing. But that really is my only criticism. I found it very, very enlightening to work with KDP. Very little profit, but that wasn't my goal. And I hated that I missed the Emory Global Institute contest. I only heard about it from after the winners were being announced, because I would have loved to have submitted.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to refrain from making a comment about Jeff Bezos's 180-foot yacht and flight to space, but so I didn't say that.
Yeah.
Okay, I think this is our last question, and so oh wait, we've got one in chat, so let me go to that one first.
Someone did ask a question about how the book, the book ends before you start writing it. I can answer that is yes, I came up with the ending to my book, how the elephant helps, and I wrote the story around that. And so that was interesting that, when I'm telling the stories to my daughter, that's kind of how it ended. And then when I actually wrote the book, everything else I filled in the pieces after that. But I know that there's different ways to do it, but that's certainly how I did it. The climax of the story came first before the whole rest of the book was written.
Yeah, it's a great question that you're always curious about when you read a book. Did they do the ending first or work their way toward it? Have any of you heard of one of the questions in the chat is readsy.com as a support for an author?
Say it again.
Readsy, REEDY.
Yes. In fact, that's one of the things, one of the resources that I was going to put in the list.
Okay.
They came up as quite helpful in looking at help promoting or help creating your book.
I love it. Everybody's all thinking together. It's great. Yeah, this is fantastic. And then another question, we might, Kevin and Dama, we might have to do some follow-up on this. The online certificate program in writing at Emory. Does anybody know about that?
Mm-mm.
Okay, we'll look into that.
I am not familiar, yeah.
I'll make a note, we'll look into it. Seems like if we should look to our own university for sources, so we'll see what we can offer on that. Okay, so my last question is, what would you do differently in your next book? And I know, Kevin, you said you're already on book number 4, so you're probably already incorporating your lessons learned.
Yeah,
so one that stands out.
Yeah, one thing with my daughter, she just turned 8, and I tell her all the time that I would like her to be and she's interested in drawing, that I want her to be the illustrator for this book. And so we're trying to work together. It's tough to keep an 8-year-old pinned down for a while, and so, but I tell her all the time that, hey, I would love for you to do it. It's, and it's with animals, of course. I didn't show this off in the beginning, but I had a friend, this is a t-shirt of all the animals characters in my book that a friend who does t-shirts made for me. So I like to work with a lot of animals. I think that in my books, because I think they could produce some emotions that humans can't, and act in ways that maybe they don't or do not. But so what would I do differently? That's a good question. It's the one question I don't think I had an answer for you.
Oh, sorry. Okay, well, you did give us an answer with your daughter being the illustrator.
Right, and it's a project that I think would be fun to work on together. This is a book that I produced and just thought it would be a fun thing to work on. It's got the same moral to it, that hey, let's find the place for these for our supporting characters in the book, and the main character has to help them find their place in it's actually a treehouse restaurant is the setting for it. So and so yeah, I think it'll be fun to work with my daughter and maybe just kind of learn from what I learned of the publishing part of it and see if we could shop it around and get some more broad appeal out there. So yeah, that's
And I think I would hire an editor. And my girlfriend, who's got the young adult book or the 9 to 12-year-old book, hired an editor. It turned out to be spelling and grammar. And there are two kinds of editors. There's content and then there's spelling and grammar. And I would look for a content editor who also did spelling and grammar, because I just think that the creative part is all mine. I feel very comfortable with that part, but I think that I would like to not have to have, as you had, 10 manuscripts to then submit to KDP. I would just like to be able to do the editing before I submitted it and then be done.
Sure.
I'm going to add to what Kevin said about illustrations. My husband found a picture of a stethoscope, which was free for the asking on the web. So that's what we put on the cover of the patient book. And then a friend's daughter, who's an artist, drew the picture on the Alzheimer's book, and she captured my mom and dog to a T without ever having met them. And so it's sort of the second part of the question. You had submitted a question as to one of which was, what would you do differently, or what was the most challenging part? And for me, the most challenging part was worrying about, could I get a cover? Could I get an appropriate cover? Because I know the cliche is, you can't judge a book by its cover. And sometimes that's true, but in reality, you literally can judge a book by its cover because it reflects not only the content, but the tone. And so I got really lucky with both. I got a hubby who was good with the computer, and I happen to have a friend who had a daughter who was very talented. So I wouldn't do anything differently, but that was the second part of the question of, what was the most challenging part? And for me, it was, could I get covers that would be appropriate and reflective of the books? And I hope I did.
That's great. Thank you. And my biggest takeaway from this is all of you found sources really close to home, and in some cases in home. So, I guess our budding authors shouldn't be afraid to ask for help, and, ask around your family and friends first before you go out to someone who doesn't know you and might not give as much support.
I guess the other thing that's a challenge that I would wonder about is, you can get help with editing, you can get help with illustrating, but I wonder if there are services that help with promoting, because like Roseanne said, there's so much legwork that you have to do. Kevin, you mentioned it as well. Yeah. And, I like writing the book, but all that legwork is something that I would love assist with.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we'll look into that, see if we can find a source and send it out. Okay, well, we are going to wrap up our session here. I just want to remind everyone that Shelley, Kevin, and Roseanne have volunteered their time here today to share this. They did not get paid. There was no royalty. They were just very kind to come share their time, as all of our speakers do. So a big thank you to our three authors.